Today, I want my colleagues to listen to some ideas that I have about tariffs generally and where we are on tariffs and where we might be on tariffs in a couple weeks, depending on what the Secretary of Commerce says. Because in a few days, that Secretary is expected to provide the President a report. This report will detail his department's findings in the investigations of whether imports of automobiles and auto parts pose a national threat to the United States. Common sense tells me it doesn't. But let me repeat that because I think it's important for us to understand whether cars that everyday Americans rely on to get to work, drive their children to schools, visit their families, whether or not those automobiles' importation threaten national security. Now, having said that, you might think that I disagree with the President, and I don't, that we must have fair and enforceable trade agreements that benefit Americans. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions in order to get and have fair and enforceable agreements. But I do not agree that we should alienate our allies or jeopardize the health of our own economy to achieve the good outcomes of fair and enforceable agreements. The Tax Foundation has found that a 25% tariff on auto imports would amount to roughly a $73.1 billion tax increase. According to the Center for Automobile Research, a 25% tariff on auto imports would also result in the loss of 700,000 jobs and raise the price of an average car by nearly $7,000. Dealers would see a decline in annual sales by as many as 2 million vehicles. Consumers would face up to a 10% increase in the cost of repairs and replacement parts. In short, raising tariffs on cars and parts would be a huge tax on consumers who buy or service their cars, whether those cars are imported or domestically produced. And make no mistake, Americans will be paying those taxes. Tariffs are a tax paid at the time of import. Historically, they've been a protectionist tool intended to prop up domestically produced goods by making foreign goods more expensive. But tariffs are not a long-term solution, and nobody wins with the producing of tariffs. While they may provide short-term protection for domestic industries, they do so at the expense of ordinary consumers and industries increasingly dependent on a complex global supply chain. On the whole, I think this all adds up to damaging the economy. And for an administration, including this senator and most Republicans on this side of the aisle, that have been crowing about the benefits of the tax bill of late 2017 and the jobs it's created and the goods it's done for workers, why would you want to put on a $73 billion tax increase through tariffs that would undo a lot of good that we say and the President says the tax bill has done? So let me repeat again, on a whole, this is going to be damaging to the economy. A 2018 study by the International Monetary Fund reviewed tariff changes across 151 countries between the decades of the 1960s and 2014. The International Monetary Fund found that tariff increases lead to less output and less productivity, and then you know what happens: more unemployment, and when you have more unemployment, you get greater inequality. The recent U.S. tariff increases have invited tariff retaliation from our trading partners. I know because Iowans are bearing the brunt of this retaliation. Imposing tariffs on auto parts will inevitably invite more retaliation, and we simply can't afford more of that. The United States must continue to lead the world on trade and economic issues, as we have for at least the period of time since World War II. We have benefited from one of the most open markets in the world, and we must continue to lead the world by providing a good example. We have led to a better world since World War II, and the results have been several decades ago, 50% of the world's population was in poverty. Today, it's less than 10%. And recent 2 or 3 references I've seen to the fact that right now or next year, as you measure middle class status in the various countries around the world and in different ways around the world, half of the world is middle class. President Trump is right to hold our trading partners accountable, so I don't find fault with him there. But we can't take benefits we have received from international trade for granted. International trade has been a tremendous benefit to farmers and businesses in my state of Iowa, but also across the country. We are better off because we can sell our products around the world. Our farmers say they don't want aid from the federal treasury, they want markets, they want to trade. You develop those markets and you keep those markets, and tariffs and retaliation send a signal to other countries that you might not be a reliable supplier, and they go elsewhere to create relationships that they can depend on. America ought to be able to be dependent upon any place in the world from the standpoint of trade. And when you talk about the America and Iowa exporting products, these are some of the best products in the world. In this vein, then I hope the President will heed my call to forgo auto tariffs and instead focus on opening up new markets. The U.S. auto industry is a major driver of our economy, supporting nearly 10 million American jobs and accounting for 3% of the gross domestic product. Without question, any tariffs that are imposed will have negative effect on the U.S. auto industry and our economy. Our focus instead should be on strengthening our relationships with our allies while targeting China's harmful trade practices and policies. Tariffs on auto parts will not help us achieve these critical priorities.